Hello. So I wanted to do a video on exploring this question of whether the government might be overcounting COVID deaths. Um, so I did this video. The last video I did, it showed that there was this big spike in the death rate, and we've got like 90,000 excess deaths in 2020 in the UK. And I wanted to kind of explore that question: how many of those were due purely to the coronavirus, and how many was due more to non-COVID excess deaths due to the mishandling of the coronavirus, of the pandemic. And I just wanted to explore the question. I may have bitten off more than I chewed with this video. I've got like 6 pages of notes here. This is going to be a bit of a mission. I'm just going to plough through it and see how we get to. And one thing I would put right at the end, but I'm going to put it right at the start, which I don't want to slag the government off too much. This is a really hard thing. I mean, if I was the Prime Minister, I would have bodged this massively. So it's a really hard... I don't know what standard is the right standard to hold the government to account. Maybe people have very high standards. They should have a high standard. But at the same time, this is a really hard thing to figure out, and they are doing their best, and I don't know. And that's one of the conclusions I've made from my investigation into whether you can tell how many of these excess deaths were non-COVID deaths and how many were COVID and how many were, because of the mishandling of the virus. And my conclusion is that it's actually really hard to find out. I thought it would be quite easy, but when you get into the statistics and the data, there's lots and lots of different explanations for things. It's quite difficult to find the truth, but there is some semi-conclusive things that you can find out, and the data still kind of paints a certain picture, and I think it's really interesting to still look into it. So I'm going to go through the whole shebang and share with you what I've discovered. But really, you need like some hardcore statistical analysis of the whole thing to figure out the truth. It's quite difficult. I could just be thick, I don't know, but I couldn't figure it out. But so the key takeaways I've done. So I do think COVID deaths, the conclusions I've come to is I do think COVID deaths have been overcounted. They probably have been overcounted. I just don't know by how much. It's hard to tell how much, but they probably have been overcounted. And it also, the data I'm about to show suggests that the focused protection of the vulnerable strategy that lots of people talk about, this data seems to support that method. But again, it's not super conclusive, but I'll go through it all. So there, lots of people have heard this claim of people dying with the coronavirus rather than of it. And how do you find out the truth about that? And what proportion of people are dying with and what proportion are dying of? Now, some people actually think, there are some people who think the government have been undercounting. And so you got 3 motives. They're either undercounting, overcounting, or being accurate. The motives for undercounting would be that the government, presumably, I think that the government are trying to downplay. They would think that the government are trying to downplay the virus to make it seem like it's not such a big deal. Russia, they did this. I'll go on to that later, but I think in Russia there's evidence that they've been doing that, and maybe China, don't know. So there's that argument, but I actually think there's more incentive to overcount because of the fact that the more excess deaths you have that aren't accountable to coronavirus, it suggests that those excess deaths must have come about from the mishandling of the virus. And it's, again, I'm going to get into this data because it's really hard to read it, but it's I think there's more incentive to overcount. And yeah, so that's what I think. And then I think we actually have evidence of it, though, because this is from the government website. Well, who's this guy? Professor John Newton, Director of Health Improvement and Public Health England, basically admitted the fact that the way we count deaths in people with COVID-19 in England was originally chosen to avoid underestimating deaths caused by the virus in the early stages of the pandemic. So he's admitting that they were kind of erring on that side. They wanted to avoid underestimating it. And then in August 2020, the government actually admitted this again, and they revised down the number by 5,000 because it was discovered that some people were getting the virus, recovering, and then months later dying and being put down as a COVID death, like a long time after they'd first had their positive result. And so this was obviously not a genuine COVID death, so they revised it down by 5,000, and then they came up with a new standard. And the new standard is still quite liberal, which is that you just have to have a positive test within 28 days of a death, and that goes down as a COVID death. So you could have a positive test, die in a car accident, 28 days later, COVID death. Apparently, I don't know how much truth there is to that, but that seems to be the case. And there's another government document here that actually, it still has it listed as with the 60 days. You've got the 28-day rule there. This is in August 2020. They still got they've got a 60-day rule here that you can, deaths that occur after 60 days will also be added to this figure if COVID-19 appears on the death certificate. This will provide a more complete measure of the burden of the disease over time. So I'm not sure exactly what they mean by that, but the point is here is that they're still quite liberal with the definition of a COVID death, which suggests that they're going to be overcounting rather than undercounting. I think the evidence leans that way. But it's hard to know by how much. Are we talking a few hundred, few thousand, few tens of thousands? I don't know. And just again, to more confirmation of this is happening in other countries as well. Italy's health minister, or the advisor to the health minister, what's his name? Here it is, Professor Walter Ricciardi. He said, in Italy, the way in which we code deaths in our country is very generous in the sense that all the people who die in hospitals with the coronavirus are deemed to be dying of the coronavirus. He said that this is a physician, this is a few in America, but it's just to show you that it's happening worldwide. She was a physician, 30 years experience, and she goes on in this video to explain that they are being asked to put COVID down on the death certificate even if they're not absolutely sure it's COVID. They're being kind of encouraged to err on that side. This guy, Senator Dr Scott Jenson, he has an interview as well. I'll put all of these links at the bottom of my video. He explains it as well, that's what they're being instructed in America to. This is America, but still, just to show you it happens, to err on the side of putting things as a coronavirus death. So they're leaning that way. CDC, this is the director of the CDC basically admitting that they even have financial incentives, because this is America again, but people who are putting COVID on the death certificate get money, more money from the government, presumably from somewhere. So, and this is the director basically admitting it, and he says, I think you're correct in that, and we've seen this in other diseases as well. So it's leaning that way. So I think they've overcounted, but I don't know by how much. So that is that. So that is that. And then the ONS, Office of National Statistics in the UK, actually make this distinction. They've actually kind of offered their own answer. So I've got this from this link I'll show you. It's from the weekly registered deaths, and this is all there. They do this all the time, and they make a distinction of, in 2020, deaths involving COVID-19 and deaths due to COVID-19, and their distinction here is 80,000, 81,000 involving. This is in England and Wales, and 73,500 just due to COVID-19, which is quite a big chunk. That's not as much as I would have thought, actually. But anyway, so that's their what the ONS official figures say. But I still suspect that even that number is a bit high. Where's my excess deaths? So one other thing. So excess deaths last year, 2020, I had the figure as 89,859. One thing to quickly just say about that is that that's actually wrong. I was going by the 53 weekly ONS figures, but the official number, you have to revise it down, because the 53 week it goes from the 28th of December 2019 to the 1st of January 2021, and you have to actually take 4 days out of that. And this, on this Office of National Statistics, this person who's the head of mortality analysis, she basically says it here. Please note that you have to include, it does not include the 4 non-2020 days, so you have to take 4 days off. So that's not really the excess deaths. The excess deaths come out at about 84,000. I've got the British, the English and Welsh numbers, and I use the same percentage to guess the Scotland and Northern Ireland numbers because I don't have theirs. It's about there. And then this is deaths involving COVID. That's still the same because that began in March, so you don't have to go back to April for January for that. That's deaths involving, and then that's deaths due to COVID. And again, I've got the English and Welsh numbers. I'm pretty sure I've got the Scottish numbers. Then I under guessed. That's a conservative guess with the Northern Ireland. It's probably more than that. But again, I kept it kind of safe. So deaths due to COVID, 81,311. So that's your excess deaths, basically. Sorry for me waffling. I'm not a great communicator. That's your excess deaths. That's your deaths due to COVID. And so that little one, ignore this little lump. That little lump there is the deaths, excess deaths not caused by COVID. So you might look at that and think, okay, that's it then. You've got all these excess deaths, and it was basically COVID. But it's not as simple as that. And again, so before, the way I'm going to have to explain this, I'm just going to go through all the data. I'm going to paint this story, and you'll start to see why it's not quite as simple as that. Yeah, I'll stick to my script, and I'll get to it at the end. You'll start to see why. So, there's the Scottish ones. So, painting a story of what's happened. So, basically, coronavirus began 2020, January, February. Here comes the virus. And it began with the UK. They seem to begin by going for this herd immunity strategy, which is, it's technically the focused protection of the vulnerable whilst letting the non-vulnerable continue. That seemed to be the method they were going for. That was the Swedish method, and this is this Great Barrington Declaration, where they've called it the focused protection. That's what they're advocating for as well. You've got 13,500 public health scientists and 40,000 medical practitioners. 750,000 concerned citizens all signed this declaration now, saying this is the method we should have done. It's the method that makes sense to me. In another video I made, I kind of mentioned this, which is your instinct is when you have a hurricane in America, and a hurricane comes along, let's say a hurricane hits Florida, you don't evacuate the entire country. You just evacuate Florida. And even then, it's voluntary. You just advise people. And then after the hurricanes come, you don't force people to give up their lives to help. You ask for charity, voluntary charity. And it's but this basic idea of you put your focus on the area where the hurricane's going to hit. Coronavirus, it's the same kind of principle. There's more to say about that, but basically that basic principle makes sense to me, makes ethical sense to me. And so it looked like Britain was going for this method. And then, this is so the story goes, Imperial College, Neil Ferguson came out with this fairly infamous number now, 500,000 deaths. That was his projection in the first wave, and it seemed to spook everybody. Now, I don't want to slag off Neil Ferguson. I don't know him. I don't know what his motives were. Maybe they were totally genuine. I don't know. Maybe he was just erring on the side of caution. Better safe than sorry, which, by the way, I'm going to make another video about that, because this is one of my conclusions to this video, will be that I don't know whether it's always best to err on the side of I don't know whether it's always best to be better safe than sorry. Sometimes I think there's such a thing as being too safe. I think it's always better to plump for accuracy rather than too safe, and you'll see this. You'll see the implications of this in this video as I go through it. But anyway, maybe that was what his motives were. Maybe it had nothing to do with Neil Ferguson. Maybe it was the government who had a selection of studies they could have chose from. They chose the most extreme. Who knows? So he said that, and it spooked everybody. And there is this question of, some people say, well, if we hadn't have locked down, maybe there would have been 500,000 deaths. And other people say, well, if we hadn't have locked down, maybe there would have been less deaths or no difference at all. And that's quite hard to answer that question unless you've got actual science to back it up. Which, by the way, on the topic, Ivor Cummins, if you haven't been watching his videos, you have to. He's the man on this. He's really, really good. Ivor Cummins. He's got a website called The Fat Emperor, and here he's got this. We're up to about 29 research papers and studies showing that lockdowns don't really make any difference. So, but then that's another video I'll make another time for something else, I think. What was that? That was the 500,000 Neil Ferguson prediction. So anyway, he made that prediction, and it seems like that was what spooked the government, and they changed their tune and they went for the full lockdown. And they also did a bunch of other stuff. So they started building the Nightingale Hospitals. Build loads of those, really record time. Loads of Nightingale Hospitals. Yeah, and then what else did they do? They also told the NHS to free up 3,000 beds. 3,000 beds. So there's this letter here that was sent out from what's his name? Don't know if you need to know, but somebody important with the NHS. He signs it halfway through. Sir Simon Stevens. Again, I don't want to slag any of these people off. He's probably a very great person. In fact, I'm not slagging him off. This is just the letter that they sent from the government. Basically, the instruction was to free up 30,000 NHS beds for the maximum possible, to get ready for this COVID. 500,000 deaths. They've got the Nightingale Hospitals. They're freeing up beds here. This is their response. This is what it seems like to me. So they freed up 30,000 beds. Where have I got to? Yeah. And that's what they've done. And then basically there was lots of fear-mongering in the public as well. Well, the media, you can call that fear-mongering. And basically this happened. So there's two things that happened. The first thing is that this, and I looked a little bit into this in my last video, this is A&E attendance and emergency admissions, and this is March and February there, and that's March and April there, and then going forward there's a massive drop-off of people going to A&E, and a massive drop-off of people being admitted into the emergency wards. Now, there are various explanations for this, but it seems like people were... Well, there's two explanations for this. One is that people were scared to go to hospital, and so they were avoiding it, which suggests that there could be people at home dying when they could have gone to hospital. The other explanation, though, is that because we were all in lockdown, everybody was safe. Nobody was out getting hurt. There was no need to go to A&E because everybody was safe at home. There's no car accidents, although car accidents only, well, you got about 2,000 deaths, but you got about 100,000 accidents. Anyway, there's various explanations for it, but it's a lot of people. You got up to about over 200 million per month going to A&E, dropping down to like 1 million there, and then back up to about 1.5 million. And the emergency admissions were up to like 550,000 a month, dropping down to almost 300,000 a month. So that's a big drop. I will just mention, so where are we? This one. On one of these NHS websites, they do just say, as a result, caution should be exercised in comparing overall occupancy rates. Well, just basically they're asking to exercise caution with this data, and I just thought that was generally a good piece of advice with all of this. This is one of my things I've learned. There's lots of different explanations for the data, but I was trying to figure out, so what proportion of these people that go to A&E and these people that get admitted, emergency admissions, end up actually dying. What's the rate? And I found this paper from a while ago. This is like 2010, 11, 12ish. So this is the best I can find, and it matches up with the data on that article, and it's about 1% in A&E. About 1% of people who go to A&E end up dying within 30 days, and about 3% on average. It says it looks about 3.5%, but I think I worked out there's another. What's table 3? Yeah, so that's there's a difference here, and there's different departments in the emergency ward, and so I had to kind of average it out. So you got about 2 point something there, and about 3 point something there. So it's probably about 3%. I'm just broad strokes rough. 3% of all of these people that go to A&E and get admitted into the emergency wards die within 30 days. So you could look at that and say, well, there's huge amounts of people here who would die. Actually, I did the calculations and I forgot to double check all this. I can't even remember now. I can't remember what the proportion is, so I'm not going to go into it because I'm going to bore you if I go too much. But you can do the maths, or you can just pause the frame and see if you can make heads and tails of that. But yeah, so I thought, that's got to be a lot of deaths. And the other big logic there, though, as well, is that surely going to a hospital is going to maximise your chances of survival if you've and particularly, hang on, let me go through this like I've gone through it with here. So so there was another explanation for this, because originally I thought, well, all these people are just staying at home scared or something. No, another explanation for this, the drop off, is that maybe the people that did go, the 1 million that did go, are the 1 million that really needed to go, and the 1 million that didn't go are the people who maybe didn't absolutely need to go to A&E. They were like, they could take care of themselves at home. That's one thing I thought. So this is just like things got very, very focused and concentrated to really care for the people who really need it and not the people who don't. But then that doesn't make quite as much sense with emergency admissions, because surely all of these people are the definition of being admitted to emergency is if you have a life-threatening problem. That's the point of the 111 number, is they're non-life-threatening. And so all of this drop-off is, you would think that, all these people who have life-threatening problems, who are not going to being admitted to emergencies, there would be some excess deaths there, you would think. But then, see, that makes me think, well, maybe this was a result of people just being safer and not going to emergencies, because everybody was locked down at home, less emergencies. but then people still have emergencies at home. There's so many different explanations for all this stuff. This is why it's difficult to figure out. But I still suspect there's got to be a certain proportion of people in these numbers who didn't go because they were scared of getting COVID, and their chances of survival are worse at home than at hospital. And so statistically, you're going to have some excess deaths that you wouldn't have had if the government hadn't scared everybody into staying home from the hospitals. That's my suspicion. But again, hard to tell. And then, so that's the first thing. And the second thing they did is, so they freed up these 30,000 beds. And what happened, I got this from this website, NHS Bedtime Series. You got, this is the number of occupied beds. So that's your normal. You've got about 80-90%, it's like 85%, up to 90% of occupied beds, total beds in hospitals across the country. Then April, March, April, and May drops right off. So this is the percentage of available beds that are occupied. And that's a big drop off. Now again, they say to be cautious with the data. Because another thing to mention about it is that doesn't mean that that's just the overall beds. On this video, Financial Times, it's not a bad flu season. This data journalists, basically this is ICU wards. These are all the previous years for flu, the numbers of people in ICU wards, and then 2020 and 2021, huge numbers of people in ICU wards. Now, I don't know whether this data is for real or not. I don't know where he's got it from. And I actually looked into the critical care beds. The number of critical care beds, 2010 till 2020, and the percentage occupied. And you have this, the percentage occupied last 10 years, every flu season, spike, last 10 years, that's how it goes. And then I imagined that even if they went to absolute maximum, like that's that is the extent to which the graph should go up. If this, now critical care beds and ICU beds, I'm not sure they're the same thing. Again, this is why you need to be a super expert to go through all of this, but I just thought, it only jumps that much, whereas ICU beds, he claims it jumps this much, which is much bigger, but I don't know. Anyway, he's probably right. It was just a little thought that I had that I didn't know, but I'm not sure about that. Anyway, so yeah, so the point was, though, that you've got this amount of unoccupied beds. It went right down. You only got 65% of beds were occupied. And so this seems to be the result of the government sending 30,000 people home, away from hospitals, and accompanied with this message of people trying to get people to stay away from hospitals. And some people, you might have seen these videos online of people going to hospitals and filming empty hospitals, and they're saying, look, where are all the people gone? I thought we're in the middle of a virus and the hospital's empty. That might have been the case, because what you didn't see in those videos is that if they had gone to the ICU wards or maybe some other coronavirus wards, they would have been heaving. Those certain parts of the hospitals might have been incredibly busy, but other parts of the hospital, I think there's truth to that they did seem to be empty. Now again, they say to have caution, so I don't know, there might be other explanations for it, but that strikes me as an inefficiency at a time when efficiency was super important. We're going through a massive pandemic. You want all stations to be at their most efficient so we can save the most amount of deaths, and that strikes me as quite a major inefficiency, due to the fact that the government overstated. They went with being too safe rather than, they went with too much safety. They overstated it, and this is the result of being too safe. You send too many people home, and then that happens. And, you know, but again, would I have done anything differently? I don't know. I'd have probably crapped myself day one. So, but anyway, that strikes me as an inefficiency. But maybe not. I don't know. And so, of course, you've got, if there's all these beds unoccupied, then that's going to lead to excess deaths that wouldn't have been there normally, including non-COVID excess deaths. And then, and this also shows up in this data. So I got this from, that's more time series, and so this is more Office of National Statistics, the weekly deaths, and you've got the excess deaths and the COVID deaths data in place of occurrence. How many occurred in hospitals, care homes, private homes, and then other. Oops, not that one. Is it this one? This is all the data, and basically you can see. So let's look at this graph. It's probably a bit better. So this is hospitals. You've got the 5-year average in blue, and the orange is the all deaths. So you can see the excess deaths going over the 5-year average. 5-year average. This is care homes, private homes, 5-year average, other. Ignore that big spike there. That's just to get the graphs on the same scale. So hospitals, big spike. Then they actually go down a bit. They have a deficit of deaths in the summer and then back up again. Care homes, big spike, as you'd expect, and then they kind of level off to about normal. But private homes, you have excess deaths, little spike there, you know, where you would imagine, but then they stay quite high for the whole year. Nothing really significant in the other. This is the excess deaths. It's private homes, they stay quite high for the whole year. Now that's in excess deaths. That's a bit weird. So I just want to go over that again. So hospitals, excess death spike, then deficit of deaths in the summer, and then excess there. Massive excess, much bigger this is the same scale, much bigger on care home, in the care homes, and then homes, there's all these excess deaths here. What I'm trying to get to as well is basically, it seems to me like the hospitals, they sent loads of people home from hospitals to care homes and homes, private homes, and people have died at home and at care homes when they would have ordinarily died at hospitals, and you've got this deficit of death there, and unoccupied beds, and that seems to be the picture that I'm beginning to see. And this is the amount of those excess deaths that are COVID deaths. So the pink purple is COVID deaths, and the blue is excess deaths. And in private homes, the number of these deaths of people dying at private homes that are coronavirus COVID deaths, it's very, very small. Sorry if I'm waffling very, very fast through this. I'm just going to fly through it. And also sorry to talk about death in such a kind of like just a numbers game. You know, I know it's for people that have actually lost people to this virus. It's a very emotional thing. But I'm just trying to get the overview, stay objective. So hospitals, excess deaths. They actually had more COVID deaths than excess deaths. So if you look at care home and homes, so care homes, they had this many COVID deaths, but they've actually got quite a big bulk of deaths were non-COVID deaths. Non-COVID excess deaths. And at homes, loads and loads of non-COVID excess deaths at home, in homes. And the in hospitals, they had 55,000 excess deaths, and only 40,000 of them were 40,000 excess deaths, but 55,000 of them were COVID deaths. So it sounds to me like they've shipped all of them, a whole chunk of non-COVID deaths to the care homes and to the private homes. and that's where these non-COVID deaths have died instead. Which again, so there is there's various explanations for that. One of the official explanations is that they would say that some people chose to die at home. Some of these people who were going to die at hospitals were told about the situation and chose to avoid the hospitals and die at home. But I still sense that it still feels like surely a big bulk of these people were scared to go to hospitals maybe, or sent out of the hospital when they probably shouldn't have done. And they've it seems to me like a bulk of those have probably died unnecessarily, especially when you look at the bed occupancy. There was spaces in hospitals. They sent too many people away, I think. Yeah. And what was this excess deaths? And then you've also got cancer treatment was put off and delayed, and all kinds of other kind of healthcare situations that were kind of put off because of the virus. Surely it's going to lead to some deaths, I think. Excess deaths. So yeah, that's the kind of picture I'm looking at. So what else did I want to say? Yep, I've said all of that. Yeah, and the basic logic that surely if you're at a hospital, your chances of survival are going to be better than when you're at home. So I just sense there's going to be some proportion of excess deaths, but I don't know. It's hard to quantify. And so this debate of did we lock down too much or did we not lock down enough? Some people think we should have locked down earlier, we should have locked down more, all of this stuff. I think in this data you have both arguments here, which is basically to say this is evidence of the focus protection route, because here you can see that in the care homes, maybe in the care homes they didn't lock down enough. You sent a load of people with coronavirus over to the care homes and you've had loads of deaths in care homes. Some people non-COVID deaths as well, which is bad, but you've got a load of deaths in the care homes. That's where they should have locked down more. And I just read an article the other day about one owner of a care home who actually managed to have no deaths in his care home, and his reasons was because he didn't follow the government's guidelines. He followed his own, and he was super strict. He didn't. The government was saying it's fine, do this, that, and the other, and he was saying no. He was super strict with his care home, and he had nobody die. Now that's just one story, but it shows that it could happen. It's that kind of idea, that principle of there should have been more lockdown in care homes, protect the vulnerable, whereas the private homes and the hospitals and the general public, you've sent too many home, you've scared the public away from the hospitals, and that led to excess deaths in private homes. So you went too much, you had too much lockdown with the general public and not enough with the care homes and the vulnerable. It almost feels like you shouldn't have locked down you shouldn't have shut down the society, and you could have taken all of that furlough money and funneled it towards the care homes and just protecting the vulnerable. That is just that's my sense, but again, who knows? It's hard to figure out this data. Okay, this video is getting very long. I hope it's still recording because my technology might be crap, but let's just have a look at a few other things. This is a really cool website, The Economist excess death tracker, and it's just interesting to see all these are the excess deaths in red line, and then the pale red is the number of those deaths that are COVID. And I did these kind of really lame graphs here, but I just wanted to try and make this point that, so if the graph looks like this at the moment, the graph looks like this in the UK, got this big hump. These blue are excess non-COVID deaths and the green are COVID deaths. If you've got a graph like that, it almost suggests that the hump is entirely coronavirus deaths, and so the government doesn't have much to blame. But if the true figure is more like this, and there are lots of these coronavirus deaths actually being counted as non-coronavirus deaths being counted as coronavirus deaths, and it's actually the true figure looks like this, that suggests to me that these deaths are a result of government mishandling of the situation. So this is what I'm trying to ascertain. But that's not the only explanation. Again, so many explanations for all this stuff, because if you look at some of these graphs, so look at Russia. If you can see that, it's a bit small on the screen, but Russia's, the pale red, the number of coronavirus deaths, is tiny in comparison to the number of excess deaths. So what's the explanation for that? My first explanation is probably because they're not reporting the coronavirus deaths. They're probably, sorry Russia, but you do seem like the kind of country that would, your communist history, you would kind of just suppress that information to make yourselves look good. But then, it's obviously showing up in the excess deaths. That's my suspicion there. Some of these South Latin American countries, you got big gaps as well. Is the same thing happening? Or is it possible that there's actually problems testing? So they've got all these excess deaths, but maybe in some of these countries, they actually don't have the ability to test properly. So that explains the big gap. But it seems to me like with a country like Britain, where's Britain? There's Britain. We're quite close. We're not actually too bad there. In Italy, the gap, I just wonder whether some of the gap is actually from the mishandling of the virus. Although it's just thinking aloud now, it's funny how I think that about Britain, but with other countries I don't think that. Maybe I'm being harsh on my own country. Maybe they're doing their best. I don't know. But yeah, they're the graphs. And it's just very difficult to nail down what's really going on. And so I'm getting close to the end now. So one of let's just go to here. So you got monthly mortality analysis from Office of National Statistics, and it came to here. So originally this question, are the government overcounting COVID deaths, I thought would be an easy one to figure out. And I originally thought that, well, what you would do is you would just look to see if other deaths, there's a deficit in other causes of death. And then you could see that, so they're taking from that column, adding to the COVID column. That's what's going on. And so I saw things like this. This is, I've added up all the, well, they've only got the data from July to December, which is annoying. But just to make my point, blue is the 5-year average, pink is 2020. These are all the top leading causes of death. And in every single column, all of these other causes of death are down. By quite a lot, especially influenza and pneumonia, which I'll say something about that in a minute. But this one's a little bit up. That's about the same. But then they're all down quite a lot. And I added up how much they're down just for these 6 months, and it's 202,000 deaths. I mean, somebody tell me if I got that wrong, but that's the number. That's just for 6 months. That's how much of a deficit. So this doesn't even include April and March and May. 202,000 deaths deficit in these causes of death. Now, this is just the leading causes of death. There's loads of other causes of death. So I couldn't quite figure that one out, actually, to be honest. That confused me a bit, because that's a big old number. And the COVID deaths there make up about 58,000. And it does get confusing trying to work this out, because originally I thought if you found that there was 90,000 less deaths in every other cause of death, and then you've got 90,000 COVID deaths, it would be like, aha, there you go. They've taken from there one column, put into the other. But if that was the case, you would have had 0 excess deaths. It would have balanced itself out. The fact that we've got 90,000 COVID deaths, or 90,000 COVID deaths and 90,000 excess deaths, means that all the other causes of death should be at the 5-year average. which they're not here, which confuses me. Yeah, so this is why it's all kind of tricky to figure out. And what else? So, yeah, and another thing you might expect. So I'm just going to throw all these ideas out because they're not fully figured out in my head. But another thing you might have expected is death displacement. So if you got 90,000 COVID deaths, presumably a certain proportion of those people would have died in 2020 anyway. If the average age of COVID deaths is 82 apparently, and the average life expectancy in this country is 82, and you've got these reports of massive comorbidities. I think I mentioned a bit at the start. Let's have a look. Comorbidities. So this is Italy. 12% of death certificates have shown a direct causality, or 88% of patients who have died have at least one comorbidity. Premorbidity. In America, the CDC had a figure of like 6% was direct, and 94% had comorbidities, which, you know, that's not the same as saying 6% were directly caused by COVID, the rest weren't. It's just that the rest had comorbidities, so they're complicated. And what's the point I'm trying to make is you would expect a certain number of the 90,000 COVID deaths to have died in 2020 anyway. This is a doctor who basically said something the same thing. I just found him, Klaus Puschel. I don't know who he is, so this is a bit of a rubbish evidence. He might be good. He's head of forensic medicine at University Medical Center Hamburg, and he said even if this sounds harsh, they all would have died in the course of the year. About 80% of or more of the 140 people examined suffered from cardiovascular diseases, and the average age of the dead is 80 years. So he's basically said that. Yeah. So, you would expect. So, yeah. So you would expect there to be death displacement, a certain proportion of those coronavirus deaths. Then you'd have like a death deficit later in the year. Now you did kind of see that with the hospitals. Maybe that was it. You suddenly saw this death deficit, all these build-up deaths here, and then death deficit there. But you didn't see it in the rest of the country, and you didn't see it at the end of the year. The deficit of deaths. So, yeah, it's just another way that's trying to think about this thing. What else have we got? And then the years of life lost. See, there are some. Yeah, I originally thought, you know, if the average life expectancy is 82 and the average age of death is 82, you're probably not losing many years of life lost. But actually, some people think it's as much as like 10 or 11 years life lost. Some of these studies said it was like 11.7 years of life. This is an American study, and this paper here basically argues that they've overestimated, and it could be a lot lower than that. But so again, I don't know. Confusing. And also another thing about displacement is that, again, Ivor Cummins is really good at this. You need to look at multi-year views of deaths, including the winter seasons, because some seasons you have low deaths for winter. Some winter seasons you have lots of excess deaths, some you have quite low. And when you have a low winter season, it's usually, I mean, Ivor Cummins calls it dry timber, which is, you know, whatever. That's the term. You know, you've got all these people who are probably knocking on death's door, that are built up, that haven't died over the winter, and they're prone to die. And when you actually add up every spike, they kind of even out over a long period of time. So we may find that, I think 2019 was a fairly low winter season death-wise, and we may find that in the coming years we have deficit deaths. because there's no dry timber. All the dry timber's been burnt. Sorry to use phrases like that, but you know what I mean. So you have to look at the big picture all the way through. But yes, but the difficulty I was finding was that you can't figure out how many excess deaths, non-COVID excess deaths there are without knowing. So in this here I was going from the 5-year average and then going down. This is really hard to explain, but if my contention is that that's the true picture, this is the true picture here, then if you've got so let's say that's like 50,000 excess non-COVID deaths there. Well, if you end up with if the official figures say 40,000 excess deaths, then that's 10,000. I'm not going to be able to explain this right. It's like there's a moving target. If this is predicted deaths 5-year average, and I was it's too hard to explain. It's too hard to explain, but it's kind of you're moving. That 5-year average is not what is not the number that I'm subtracting from. If I think that's the real situation here, then I need to be subtracting from there. But how can I subtract from a number that I'm trying to work out? That's the number I'm trying to work out. So I can never know that number because I can't. I don't know. It's too hard to explain. But I don't think it's confusing. I need a proper statistician to go through it all. So that's very difficult to figure that one out. There is some other possible methods. So one other method was to look at the infection fatality rate. So if you could find out the exact infection fatality rate of the coronavirus, then you could work out what proportion of the population you would expect to die, and then you can compare that with the numbers. And so we do have some estimations for that. Let's go through that. If you're still with me, people are probably left now because I'm boring everybody. But if anybody's still there, infection fatality rate. So this Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine, Oxford, they have this is for England, the infection fatality rate. And the infection fatality rate it's the number of people who die who get infected. So it's not the case fatality rate. That depends on how many cases you've actually been able to, the country has been able to find. This is based on the actual infection. So you're taking the number of people who are genuinely infected. It's the more accurate number, and they put it at either 0.3 or 0.49%. So flu is 0.1% max, something like that. And if flu is 0.1%, and on average about 17,000 people die. Well, let me just go through this. So they put it at 0.3 and 0.49. This is another study with Stanford and the World Health Organization. John Ioannidis, can't pronounce his name, and he puts the number at, on average, about 0.23, but it varies. And for some countries that had high mortality, and I think Britain would be included in that, it could be as high as 0.57. But these are some numbers, and then you've got one other, which is Imperial College. These were the guys who said there was going to be 500,000 deaths in the first wave, so I don't hold this one in such high esteem. 1%, so that's the highest, and they think it could be as much as 1%, but I think I'm going to ignore that one. I don't know, maybe I shouldn't, but they've been wrong. They overestimated last time. So they're the numbers, and so if you actually kind of do it, work out a high end and a low end estimation for Britain, for the UK, 17,000 flu deaths on average a year, and that's at about a 0.1% rate. So if you took a low end figure. Let's go a low end figure of 17,000 times that by 2.3 to get to the 0.23%. That's about 39,000 COVID deaths. If you go from the 5.7 number, you get to about 97,000 deaths, and the average in between there is about 70,000. And that 70,000 deaths is actually the number I kind of suspect might be the true number, but they've got us down for the official number is 81,311. I think it's probably closer to about 70,000, and there's another 10k, so you've got about 15k excess deaths that were due to the mishandling of the virus. That's my suspicion, and it matches up perfectly with, like, right in between those two, that high and low estimate there. But who knows? Yeah, it's unlikely to be below 0.23% because coronavirus has basically outcompeted the flu. Now, this is another thing I wanted to say. I'm just jamming all of my information into one video like a lunatic. But another thing is, another thing I thought was suspicious was there was no flu deaths. The flu deaths in the UK was like really low, and I thought, well, that's what they've done. They've taken from the flu column, added it to the coronavirus to ramp the numbers up. But actually, apparently, this is a natural phenomenon. When a new, stronger virus appears on the scene, it outcompetes all the other viruses. Ivor Cummins talks about it in this video. Where has the flu gone? There's a book he quotes. He mentions R. Edgar Hope Simpson. It's called The Vanishing Trick, and it basically just outcompetes the flu. Doesn't totally wipe it off the face of the map, but effectively it does. This is the World Health Organization. This was back in like February, March, April, May. Flu, this is the number of flu in the whole world. Global flu just wipes off, just totally disappeared. No more flu. Going into this winter, no flu. Again, you know, my original suspicion was conspiracy theory. What's going on here? But I think that's an actual naturally occurring phenomenon. And so because of that, my point is that if flu normally in the UK kills between about 10 and 30,000, then coronavirus, if it's a stronger virus and it's wiped off flu, it's probably going to be stronger than that. So you're going to be looking at least 40, 50,000 as a low end guess in the UK. But again, that's the low end. Could be 70,000, but it could be bang on. Maybe the British government are absolutely right, and 81,000 is exactly what it is. I don't think so. I think it's probably about 70,000 myself. And just some other little interesting tidbits. The IFR, so the IFR, the infection fatality rate, varies from location to location quite a lot. And this is another thing, because people often say, well, you've got this huge death rate in Britain, all these people that have died, and people in the UK, and people go, well, isn't that a sign that we're the worst? And it's like, again, you've got to be careful with all this data, because it seems to me like the reason why some countries get hit harder by the coronavirus than other countries is because of things like the age of the population is a big one, and Britain have got a high age, so is Italy. A lot of these countries that got hit hard have very old populations. So this basically shows it here, the age of the population. Well, this is just an example, but you got in Niger, you got very young population, huge amounts of young people, not very many old people. Iran, a little bit same like that, quite a lot of fairly young people, not many old people. New York, quite a lot of old. USA, quite a lot of old. Italy, lots and lots of old. And then you come down here and you see the it basically matches that. The rate of COVID deaths, what is that? That is the death rate. In Nigeria it's very low, Iran a bit more, USA, then Italy, New York. And I think that basically matches, it correlates. So the age of the population. Another big one is vitamin D levels, which I won't get into now, but that's huge. It seems to be it has a very high correlation. Where's this paper? Vitamin D a highly significant positive correlation. Oh no, this is the equator. That's not vitamin D, but there is correlation with vitamin D, and Ivor Cummins goes into that a lot. And this is one of the explanations why Japan did well, because even though they've got a very old population, they have very high level rates of vitamin D. Yeah, I would just advise you to look into that and get your vitamin D, get out in the sun, have your supplements, because vitamin D is very, very, very important. What was this one? Yeah, another one is like latitude, just your place on the Oh no, this is vitamin D, because basically it's a highly significant positive correlation was found between lower death rates and a country's proximity to the equator. And the idea is that, you know, the people nearer the equator get a lot more vitamin D, a lot more UV sunlight exposure, and there's a high correlation there. Yeah, and the latitude, and again Ivor Cummins goes into this. It makes a big difference to the shape of the curve. This is why in South American countries you've got this kind of very smooth, long arch over the summer, and then in the northern hemisphere we have these big spikes in the winter, and that's just to do with like atmospherical latitude. I don't know. Ivor Cummins explains it better, but it's natural and it happens every year. And again, so I want to make a video. Another video I want to make is about how I don't even think the lockdowns work. I did show you those 30 papers that say it doesn't make much difference. And that is my feeling, is that I don't think lockdowns make much difference. And all of this stuff is just happening totally outside of our control. It's mainly superstition, I think. My feeling is that, you know, lockdowns and mask wearing is like pouring water over your head through a sieve and expecting not to get wet. That's my sense. This is like, these viruses have been around for like millions and millions of years. They learnt how to survive and infect populations even in biblical times when we're all spaced out and we're far less interconnected than we are today. These viruses know how to get around, and the thought that we could, you know, stop it. I mean, if you'd have to be super strict with the lockdown, like the care home story. If you're super strict with it, maybe you can stop it. But in the general population, and with wearing the masks, I don't think they work. There's 4 decades of studies saying that masks don't work. I don't know, actually. I won't get into the masks because maybe they help a little, but I don't really think they work. Because the virus just goes straight through. It might stop some of the breath particles, but the virus goes straight through. But again, I won't get into that. But yeah, I might make a video about lockdowns, and I particularly want to make a video about the harmful effects of lockdowns. Yeah, I might do that, because that's another downside. The downside is this theme of like better safe than sorry. That's not always the case. Erring on the side of safety can sometimes have very bad collateral damage that occurs from it, and I think we're seeing this with the lockdown. Yeah, so I'll make some videos about that, I think. And just one other thing to say about why there are different rates of deaths in different countries is some countries, their hospitals got overwhelmed, and then that led to more deaths, like in Italy. And you might see that with the economics, the Economist tracker. Where was it? I don't know whether you see Italy. Oh, there. So yeah, they did have a lot of excess deaths that were non-COVID related. So maybe that was because of their hospitals being over capacity. Don't know, but yeah. And I'm nearly on to my final point. So my final point is just a final note about the excess deaths I wanted to make, which is again trying to figure out the numbers. I've heard some people say one thing you've got to go careful with the excess death numbers is because the population grew 500,000 last year, and if the death rate is about 1% of that, that's 5,000 deaths. So you would expect at least some of these excess deaths to just be from population growth, 5,000 of them. But if you actually look into the number of excess deaths over history, it's actually the average over like long periods of time. I think what did I work it out as? Oh, it's not very high. Minus 0.17. I don't know. The average over the last 40 years is about minus 4.6. What's that? So that's 4,000. I'm talking there. It's about minus 5,000. But then the average after the last 10 years is plus 10,000 deaths, and the average over the last 5 years is plus 23,000 excess deaths. We're talking. So this is the last few years, 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19. These are the number of excess deaths we've had each year: 36,000, 23,000, 24,000, 25,000. Now it's just gone down a bit there, and maybe that's because before then we had fairly good years, and so, you know, after some good years we couldn't keep it up, and so we've kind of leveled off a bit. But it's just, my point is that it's hard to tell what the true excess deaths figure should be. It's hard to tell. Should we have expected the excess death average over the last 5 years is 23,000? So should we have expected 23,000 excess deaths non-COVID anyway, or not? My suspicion is that the number was coming down anyway, so probably not. Probably not. But again, just the point that it's difficult to figure out exact numbers on this thing. So anyway, I am at the end of this mega video that I had a feeling was going to be mega, and I hope it's still recording. But I'm just going to sum up my key takeaways at the end of this. So, well, basically I think it's evidence for the focused protection of the vulnerable method strategy and letting the non-vulnerable carry on, because it seems to me like this method of they panicked too much, they sent people out of the hospitals to private homes and care homes to free up beds. They should have done more protection of the care homes, and they shouldn't have scared the public and panicked so much with the private homes. And you've had these excess deaths here in private homes, which needn't have been the case, and you've had this big peak of deaths in care homes, which shouldn't have been the case. They could have maybe avoided that. I don't know if they could or not, but maybe. That's my sense, is that yeah, I think the excess deaths was probably closer to about 70,000, and maybe about 15,000 or so were excess non-COVID deaths that could have been avoided. And in fact, actually, some of the COVID deaths in care homes could have been avoided. Could have had lower excess deaths in all. But again, who knows? And then the only other takeaway is this better safe than sorry attitude. I think is sometimes wrong. I think you can be too safe. You can go too cautious sometimes, and it actually has collateral damage. And I think I might make a video about that possibly next. We'll see. Anyway, what a mission. Man, I'm going to try and make my videos smaller and more condensed in future. But anyway, if anybody's listening, I hope that was informative. And is that the lot? Yeah, that'll do. Okay, see you later. Bye bye.